The birds went quiet when he arrived. Chicago had already taken everything it wanted from Jordan Sanders. She came home to Winter Bend to disappear. For 3 quiet weeks, the mountains let her breathe. Then a black SUV rolled up Havenwoods Drive. The air changed. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he'd come. But she knew one thing. Whatever peace she'd built in Winter Bend wasn't going to survive him. The first thing Jordan Sanders noticed about him was that the birds went quiet. She'd been carrying a tray of herbal teas across Havenwood's back porch when the black SUV pulled through the pine-lined drive, and just like that, the finches that had been rioting in the spruce trees above her simply stopped. As though the vehicle had brought its own silence with it. As though the air itself recognized something and decided to hold its breath. She should have taken that as a sign. Jordan had been back in Winter Bend for 3 weeks by then, and she was only just beginning to sleep through the night again. Colorado's mountains had a way of doing that, offering quiet like a prescription, the kind of deep, bone-level stillness that Chicago had no interest in providing. Chicago had taken everything from her. Her career, her confidence, the version of herself she'd spent 6 years constructing from scratch. The corporate scandal hadn't been her fault. But fault, she'd learned, was rarely the point. What mattered was who got left holding the bag when the smoke cleared. Jordan had been holding it alone. So she'd come home, back to Aunt Willa and Uncle Silas, and their wellness retreat on the edge of town, where the pine forests were turning extravagant green and the last patches of snow dissolved like secrets in the morning sun. She taught meditation classes with shaking hands at first, then steadier ones. She learned the names of wildflowers. She woke before dawn and walked the trails until she felt something other than numb. She was not healed, but she was healing. And then the SUV stopped in front of the main cabin, and the man who stepped out of it looked like something her nervous system was entirely unprepared to process. Yeo Jung-min was, in the most unsettling way possible, beautiful. That was the word that arrived first, before dangerous, before cold, before every rational instinct she possessed. He was tall, genuinely, structurally tall, the kind of height that reorganized a space around him, with wide shoulders and the sort of composed, unhurried physicality that suggested his body was a thing he trusted completely and absolutely. His hair was cut short, close to the scalp, framing a face that was all clean lines and restrained violence. And his eyes, black-brown, quiet, scanning, moved across Havenwood's grounds with the calm assessment of a man cataloging exits. He wore a dark coat despite the spring warmth, collar turned up, and when his sleeve shifted as he accepted his bag from the driver, Jordan caught the edge of ink crawling up his forearm toward his wrist. Not the decorative kind. The kind with history in it. Every person within eyeshot had gone slightly rigid. Jordan watched one of the male staff members physically take a step backward. She took a step forward. Her aunt had briefed her. Private guest. For week's day. Sensitive situation. He needs a wellness liaison, someone patient and steady. Jordan had raised an eyebrow. Willa had met it with a look that said, "I'm choosing you on purpose." She understood why now. Half the staff looked like they wanted to call someone. "Mr. Yeo." She crossed the porch and extended her hand, voice even. "I'm Jordan Sanders. I'll be your wellness liaison for your stay." He looked at her hand, then at her face. A long, unhurried assessment. The kind that should have made her skin crawl but instead made something low in her stomach pull tight. He didn't shake her hand. "I don't need a liaison," he said. His English was perfect, accented with something smooth and controlled, like everything else about him. "I need a room." Jordan lowered her hand without missing a beat. "You'll have both." Something shifted, microscopic, at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. More like the absence of a dismissal. He was, predictably, a nightmare. He refused the morning meditation. He sat through the first breathwork session with his arms crossed and his jaw locked, radiating contempt so dense it had a texture. He intimidated the therapist assigned to his anger management sessions simply by existing in the room. The man kept glancing at Jordan like she was the only lifeguard on duty at a very dangerous pool. Which, increasingly, she was. "You don't have to participate," she told him on the 3rd day, settling onto the meditation cushion across from him in the sunlit studio. Outside, a pair of deer grazed at the tree line. "But you do have to be here. Those are 2 different things." "This is pointless." His voice was flat. Certain. Maybe. She folded her hands in her lap. Close your eyes anyway. No. Then look at the window. A beat. He turned his head toward the glass, and Jordan exhaled slowly and guided the session like he wasn't watching the tree line, like a man waiting for something to emerge from it. He never closed his eyes. But he stayed. She caught him, on the 6th evening, carrying 2 heavy equipment crates from the supply shed for her aunt without being asked. Willa was a small woman in her 60s with a bad shoulder, and Jung-min had simply materialized, lifted both crates like they were empty, and deposited them inside the workshop without a word. Willa beamed at him. He looked faintly uncomfortable with it. Jordan watched from the doorway of the kitchen, towel in her hands, and felt something shift in her chest that she firmly decided to ignore. It was the retreat dog that broke her composure entirely. Havenwood kept a large, cheerful golden retriever named Smokey, who had no respect for personal space or social cues. One morning, she rounded the corner of the east cabin and found Jung-min crouched on the ground, all 6 foot whatever of him, tattooed and terrifying, letting Smokey lick his face while he scratched behind the dog's ears with both hands, murmuring something low and soft in Korean. He looked up and found her watching. The warmth vanished so completely it might never have existed. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked past her without a word. But she'd seen it. And he knew she'd seen it. And it rattled them both. The incident at the retreat's communal fire pit happened one evening. A guest, a loud, entitled man from Denver who'd been nursing expensive whiskey and a bad attitude for 2 days, stumbled into Jung-min's path and then, incredibly, chose to take offense at the collision. Words were exchanged. The man, emboldened by alcohol and the apparent softness of the wellness retreat setting, stepped into Jung-min's space. Jordan felt the temperature change before she saw his body respond. A stillness moved through him. Not calm. Nothing like calm. A coiling, pressurized quiet that was far worse than any raised voice. His jaw locked. Both hands closed slowly at his sides. The air around him seemed to compress. The other guests had already taken 2 steps back. Jordan was already moving. She stepped between them, not because she was naive, not because she didn't understand exactly what she was standing in front of, but because she was the only person in that circle who wasn't afraid of him. She put her hand on Jung-min's forearm. Lightly. Just her palm against his sleeve. He went completely still. Come on, she said quietly, only to him. Walk with me. The fire popped. The drunk man made some small, retreating sound. And Jung-min, the man who had beaten an allied Mafia captain so badly the man was still in a hospital bed, turned and walked away from the confrontation because Jordan Sanders had touched his arm. They both knew it. Neither of them said a word about it. The town of Winter Bend had one coffee shop worth mentioning, Blue Kettle, tucked between a bookstore and a hardware store on Main Street. Mismatched mugs, chalkboard menu, the smell of cinnamon and dark roast hanging in the rafters. Jordan took Jung-min there on the 2nd week for a supply run errand, which was probably a mistake, but Willa had asked her to show him some of the town, and Jordan had decided to stop pretending his presence didn't affect her focus. He sat across from her at a corner table and looked at the menu like it had personally inconvenienced him. This place serves oat milk lattes, he said. Order one. I don't drink oat milk lattes. Order something else then. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Or don't. It's a coffee shop, not a peace negotiation. He looked up at that, and something in his expression did what it occasionally did, settled, just slightly, into something that wasn't disdain. It was harder to name. Warmer, if warmth was a thing this man was capable of. He ordered a black coffee. They were almost done when Gerard Green walked in. Jordan recognized him from high school. Barely. The way you recognize someone you've tried to forget. He'd been 2 years ahead of her. The type of boy who'd grown into the type of man who took up too much room in every sense. He made his way to their table without invitation, leaned his forearms on the back of her chair, and started talking. She deflected. Politely, then less politely. He kept talking. He glanced at Jung-min with the particular brand of dismissal that men like him reserved for men they'd already decided were unimportant. Jordan watched Jung-min register this. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He set his coffee cup down with a quiet, precise click, and he looked at Gerard Green, and that was all. That was the entire event. He simply looked at him. Gerard stopped mid-sentence. Something in Jung-min's eyes, dark, still, absolute, communicated something that required no translation and no volume. It was the absence of a threat, which was somehow worse than a threat. It was certainty. The calm of a man who didn't need to perform danger because he simply was it. Gerard left. Fast. Jordan exhaled. She reached across the table without thinking and touched Jung-min's wrist, his pulse jumping once beneath her fingers before he controlled it. You didn't have to do that, she said. I didn't do anything. She held his gaze. I know. That was the thing that undid them both. She wasn't thanking him. She wasn't afraid of him. She was acknowledging him. The restraint, the choice, what it had cost him to be still. And he looked at her like no one in his life had ever done that before. She pulled her hand away. He watched the space it left. The sauna was Willa's idea. A therapeutic session, she'd said. Part of the program. Jordan had agreed, because she was a professional. She was deeply regretting her professionalism. The cedar walls of the small sauna glowed amber in the low light, steam coiling thick and slow through the air. Jung-min sat across from her, a towel across his shoulders, and Jordan was making a very concentrated effort to look at literally anything other than the ink that mapped itself across the broad planes of his chest and shoulders. Dark, dense, beautiful in the way of something not designed to be looked at for too long. He wasn't making it easier. He was watching her. Not aggressively. Not the way men sometimes watched her. With that acquisitive, calculating edge. He watched her the way he watched the tree line. Like something he was trying to understand, trying to prepare for. Like something that had gotten past his defenses without his permission. You're not scared of me, he said. It was not a question. It was almost an accusation. No, she agreed. You should be. You keep saying that. She met his gaze through the steam. And I keep not being. The heat in the room had nothing to do with the sauna anymore. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that she could see the light brown flecks in his eyes and the tension in his jaw that never fully released. Jordan. Her name, low and careful in his mouth. Like he was testing the weight of it. She held very still. Don't, he said softly. Don't what? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back, and the distance between them was suddenly the most unbearable thing in the room. Don't look at me like that. She learned it in pieces. The way you learn anything real about someone. In the unguarded moments. In the things he never voiced. He'd had a brother once. She gathered this from a single sentence about Chicago and the way he'd gone silent immediately after it. His father was a man he respected without warmth. His world was made entirely of loyalty hierarchies and calculated risks, and the understanding that mercy was a currency you spent carefully or you lost everything. And yet, he stayed for her meditation sessions now. Not participating, but staying. He still didn't close his eyes. But his jaw unclenched, sometimes, just slightly. His hands opened in his lap instead of fisting. Small things. Enormous things. One night, late, they sat on the back porch when neither of them could sleep, and he told her about Chicago. Not about the syndicate, not about the violence, but about the skyline at 3 a.m. and the Korean restaurant his father had taken him to every Sunday until he was 12, and the way winter there felt like the whole city was holding its breath. Jordan told him about the corporate office in downtown Chicago where she'd worked for 6 years and arrived early every morning and left last every night, and somehow still found herself unemployable in 48 hours. She didn't tell him the details, but she told him what it felt like. He listened the entire time without once offering a solution, and she realized, with quiet shock, that no one had done that in a long time. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. The corner of his mouth moved. What did you expect? Less. She searched for the word. Less you. He looked at her. She looked at the mountains. Go inside, Jordan, he said at last. His voice had gone rough. I'm not cold. I know. A pause that pressed against her like a hand. Go inside anyway. She went. She lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, heartbeat loud in the quiet dark, knowing full well that he was still sitting on that porch. He almost kissed her later that week. They'd been going over his schedule for the final week of his stay. Standing at the wooden table in the main hall. Papers spread between them. Jordan's pen moving. She'd said something that made him almost smile, and when she'd looked up, he was already close. Too close. his head bent toward hers, the air between them going electric and thin. His eyes dropping to her mouth for one devastating second. Jung-min, she breathed. He pulled back. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He picked up his coffee, walked to the window, and stood there looking out until his composure returned. "What time is the group session?" he asked. His voice was perfectly controlled. Jordan stared at the back of his tattooed neck and felt like she might shake apart. 9, she said. Same as every day. He nodded once and said nothing else, but his knuckles were white around the mug. Jordan's phone rang that Friday evening, and everything changed. Her friend Deja's voice was careful in a way that meant bad news. Jordan's cousin Lucas, 22, impulsive, sweet in the way of someone who hadn't yet learned consequences, had gotten himself into debt with a local crew operating out of the abandoned mill district. Not much, but enough. They came by his place today, Deja said. Jordan, it didn't sound good. Jordan sat on the edge of her bed with one hand pressed flat to her sternum, breathing through the dread that pooled cold and thick in her chest. She told herself it would be fine. She told herself she could handle it quietly. She did not tell Jung-min. From across the property, through the lit window of his cabin, he watched her pace, shoulders tight, phone still in her hand. Something clearly wrong. She handled it the way she handled everything, with her whole heart and no backup. Jordan drove to the mill district the next morning and walked in with her chin up and her voice calm, and her hands completely steady right up until they grabbed her. They were not the boys she'd grown up with. The ones running the operation now were imported, hard-eyed men who saw Lucas's debt as an opportunity and Jordan's presence as leverage. They took her phone. They told her cousin he had 48 hours to bring the money. They told her not to make noise. They had no idea who was staying at Havenwood Retreat. The text Jordan's aunt received that evening was plausible but wrong. Willa held the phone out for Jung-min to see during dinner, explaining that Jordan had gone to stay with a friend for a few days. He read the text once. He set down his fork. When did she leave? He asked, his voice perfectly pleasant. This afternoon, she said. He excused himself from the table, went to his cabin, and pulled up the location data his man in Chicago had been passively monitoring since day 3 at Havenwood. Not surveillance, just a precaution. The kind of baseline security he maintained around anything he'd decided mattered. Jordan's last signal. 9:43 a.m. 3 miles east of town. She hadn't moved. He called the man whose data it was. Who did she speak to before 9:43? A pause. Keys clicking faintly on the other end. One number. Listed as Lucas Daniels. Find him, he said. Now. Lucas Daniels had the specific guilt of someone who already knew exactly what they'd done and was waiting to be destroyed for it. He opened his apartment door, saw Jung-min in the hallway, and audibly stopped breathing. He started. Sit down. Jung-min said quietly. Not loudly. There was never any need for volume. The boy sat. Men who lie to me don't get second chances, Jung-min said. I'm going to ask you once. Choose your next words very carefully. Where is she? It took under 3 minutes. Lucas tried to explain. Stammered something about a mistake, about not meaning for things to go this far, but Jung-min didn't care. The address was the only thing that mattered. Jung-min was already moving before Lucas finished the sentence. There were 4 of them at the mill. They were armed. 2 of Jung-min's men from Chicago had been in Winter Bend since day 2 of his stay. Standard protocol for the heir of the Yeo organization. He didn't travel alone. He just traveled ahead. They were waiting in a car 2 blocks from the mill when he called. What happened next took 11 minutes. Jordan heard it from the back room where they'd locked her. Not screaming, not gunfire, just a sequence of sounds that communicated something catastrophic was occurring in an extremely organized fashion. Then a door. Then footsteps she recognized. She knew his footsteps. The lock clicked. The door swung open, and there he was, coat dark, breathing steady, no visible injury, and the look on his face when he saw her was the most frightening thing she'd witnessed all day. Not because it was violent. Because it wasn't. Because it was something she didn't have a word for yet. Raw and enormous and controlled only because he was choosing, physically choosing, to contain it. She crossed the room and he pulled her in before she reached him. His arms closing around her so tightly, she felt the tension in his whole body. the barely leashed fury that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the 4 men who'd had the extraordinary poor judgment to touch her. "I'm okay," she said into his chest. "I know." His voice was gravel. "You're okay now." They were both shaking by the time they reached the retreat. Not from cold, not from fear, from the overload of everything they'd been storing. Jordan turned on him in the main hall. "You could have been killed." He stared at her. "I wasn't. You walked in there with 2 people against 4 armed men who had no reason to, Jordan." His voice dropped. Low, rough, exhausted. "Stop." "No." She stepped forward. "You don't get to risk your life and then tell me to stop." "I would do it again." Absolute. Zero hesitation. She looked at him. The ink. The jaw locked against everything he wasn't saying, and felt something crack open in her chest that she'd been guarding since she first watched him step out of that black SUV. "I've been trying," he said, quietly now, "not to want you." She couldn't breathe. "I've been trying to stay away from you. Because you're..." A pause. The muscle in his throat moved. "You're everything my world destroys. And I am not allowed to fall in love." Jung-min. "If anything had happened to you..." He stopped. His eyes closed once, briefly. "I don't know what I would have done. I'm tired," Jordan said. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly. "I am so tired of pretending I don't want you to." He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps. The kiss was not gentle. It wasn't careful. It wasn't anything either of them would have designed in a calm moment. It was everything they'd been denying. The weeks of proximity and restraint and almost. The gravity of all those small surrenders, detonating all at once. His hands found her face, her jaw, her hair, holding her like she was both the most precious thing he'd ever held and the only real thing in his world. She grabbed his lapels and pulled, and he made a sound low in his chest that unraveled something in her. He kissed her like she was his. She let him, because she was. They did not surface until the following morning, and the light through the cabin windows was pale and gold and generous, and Jordan lay with her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat slow, his hand moving through her hair with a thoroughness that felt nothing like the man everyone else was afraid of. She should have known the peace wouldn't hold. He told her over breakfast. He didn't soften it, didn't dress it up. She'd always respected that about him, the brutal consistency of his honesty. The local crew was gone. Not scattered, not arrested, not warned. Gone. Their operation dismantled. Their network exposed. Their leadership erased through a combination of methods he described without flinching. There was nothing left that could touch her again. Some of those boys had gone to her high school. She knew their mothers. She stood up from the table. "They had you in a room with your hands zip-tied," he said, his voice even. "That doesn't mean you had to annihilate them." She heard her voice shake. "You could have gotten me out. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He was looking at her steadily. No apology in his face. Nothing resembling regret. "I will always do exactly that. And I would do it again. I am not yours." The words landed. She watched them land. Something in his expression didn't flinch. Exactly, but it registered. A fracture. Deep and invisible. "No," he said. Quiet. Final. "You're not." He stopped attending sessions the next day. Requested a different liaison from Willa, citing a scheduling conflict that no one believed. Jordan saw him across the property sometimes. Distance between them like a physical structure. Like something built out of shared history and mutual self-protection. She told herself it was right. She told herself she couldn't accept what he was, what his world required, what loving him would cost. She told herself this until she almost believed it. He did not say goodbye when his 4 weeks ended. His SUV left before Jordan came down for morning prep, and the Pineline Drive was empty, and the birds were loud again. And she stood on the back porch with her coffee going cold and felt the exact shape of every decision she'd made. Chicago had a specific smell in the spring. Lake water and concrete, and something metallic underneath it all. The exhaled breath of a city that never fully slept. Jung-min had loved it once, or at least accepted it as the natural atmosphere of his existence. Now it irritated him. He sat in his penthouse office on the 34th floor. The skyline arranged beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like a performance he was no longer interested in watching, and reviewed the week's reports. Alliance updates. Revenue flows. A territorial negotiation that required his attention. He reviewed them all with the efficiency of a man trained to evaluate threats and resources, and he felt absolutely nothing. He told himself this was normal. He told himself the hollow sensation in his chest was fatigue, readjustment, the natural aftermath of a month away from his world. He had never been a man who lied to himself about the things that mattered. He told his assistant, "If a woman named Jordan Sanders ever contacts this office, contacts any of my staff, or arrives at this building, she comes to me immediately. Every barrier removed. No delays." His assistant wrote it down without expression. Jung-min looked out at the city and thought about the particular sound of her laugh, quiet, real, unheld, and decided he needed more work to do. He was not expecting her to come. He was absolutely certain she wouldn't. Willa sat Jordan down 3 days after he left and made her tea she didn't ask for, which was always the opening move of a conversation Jordan wasn't going to win. "You were different," her aunt said simply. "While he was here, you were alive again." "He's dangerous, and Willa." "Yes." Willa wrapped her hands around her own mug. "So was the corporate world. The difference is, that world lied to you while it was breaking you. That man never pretended to be anything other than what he is." Jordan stared at the grain of the wooden table. "The people who hurt you in Chicago," Willa continued, "they wore suits and smiled at you and shook your hand and organized your destruction over lunches you were never invited to. That's the shape of danger that broke you, baby." A pause. "A man who tells you the truth about who he is? That's not the same thing." Jordan sat with that for a long time after her aunt left. She was not the woman who had run from Chicago. She was not the woman who had arrived here 3 months ago, soft-bellied and barely sleeping, trying to reconstruct herself from rubble. She had survived a betrayal that had leveled her, and she had gotten back up, and she was not going to let fear masquerade as wisdom. She booked a flight. The Yeo organization's headquarters occupied a 45-story glass tower in Chicago's North Loop. Jordan walked into the lobby, her chin up, her hands steady, and gave her name to the man at the reception desk. He recognized it. She watched his expression rearrange. "One moment," he said. He made a single call. Then he stood, smoothed his jacket, and personally escorted her to an elevator whose panel he activated with a key card she didn't have. "Mr. Yeo's floor," he said, and stepped back as the doors closed. The elevator opened into a hallway lined with dark wood and dim, deliberate lighting, the city visible through glass on all sides, the scale of it dizzying and enormous, and his. Men in suits moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of people trained to anticipate rather than react. Several of them looked at her. None of them stopped her. She found him through a glass wall. He was standing at the head of a long conference table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the full topography of his forearm tattoos visible, speaking with quiet intensity to 4 men who were looking at him with the careful attention of people who understood the cost of not paying it. He was in his element here, powerful and unhurried and unapologetically himself, and she watched him for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he looked up. The silence that followed was the kind that exists before earthquakes. He went completely still. His lieutenants looked between him and the woman in the doorway, taking the temperature of the room, reading the shift in his body language with the practiced instinct of men trained to track threat signals. This was not a threat signal they recognized. Something moved across Jung-min's face. Disbelief first, then something that was not disbelief at all, that had been sitting just beneath the surface of every hour since he'd driven away from Havenwood. Something fierce and relieved and hungry and, if he'd been willing to name it, terrified. He said something in Korean to his men without breaking eye contact with her. They filed out in seconds. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was low, controlled. The same voice he used when the situation was too important for anything other than precision. She crossed the room. "You left without saying goodbye. Because you don't belong in this world." He held his ground as she approached. Jaw set, everything in him wound tight. "It will break you. Everything I touch. You don't get to decide what I can survive." She stopped in front of him, petite against his size, and completely unintimidated by it. "You've been deciding that since the day you arrived. What I can handle. What I can know. What I deserve to be protected from." She held his gaze. "Stop." His expression cracked, just at the edges. Jordan. I'm not here because it's safe. She reached out and took his wrist. The same gesture as that first fire pit evening, and felt his pulse jump beneath her fingers the same way it had then. I'm not here because it's smart or practical or any of the things I've spent my whole life being. I'm here because I choose you. Her thumb moved over his pulse point. I'm here because whatever you are, whatever this costs, you saw me. You actually saw me. And I am not leaving that behind because I'm afraid. The control he'd been holding, the edifice of distance and restraint, and she's better off without me that he'd been constructing since he left Winter Bend. It didn't shatter. It dissolved. Quietly. Completely. He moved. His hands found her face. Thumbs at her jaw, tilting her up toward him, and when he kissed her it was nothing like the first time. The first time had been a detonation. This was different. This was deliberate. A choice made in full knowledge of everything it meant. Full knowledge of the cost, the permanence, the absolute impossibility of walking it back. He kissed her like a man who had decided. She kissed him back like a woman who had decided first. He pulled back just far enough to press his forehead to hers, his hands still cradling her face. Both of them breathing like they'd surfaced from something deep. If you stay, he said, low and rough, I won't let you go. Good. She curled her fingers into his shirt. I'm not leaving. He kissed her again. Slowly this time. Thoroughly. With the patience of a man who understood that some things were worth taking his time with. She felt the city around them, enormous and indifferent and incandescent through the glass, and she felt him, solid and warm and real, and she thought, this is the shape of my life now. Not the version she'd planned. Not the version she'd mourned. Something truer. Something that had been waiting for her to stop being afraid of it. The file arrived one morning. Jung-min had requested it quietly, without telling her. The kind of unilateral decision he knew Jordan would have an opinion about. So he'd made it before she had the chance. A full audit of her years at Larson, Abbott and Cole. The chain of events leading to the corporate setup. Names. Dates. Communications. He read it alone in his office, door closed, city outside going dark. The file was thorough. His man was thorough. Every layer of the betrayal was documented. The colleagues who had known, the ones who'd participated, the one who'd designed it. A man named Derek Cole, who Jordan had once called a mentor and who had later, apparently, been something more than that. Who had used their history as a key. Jung-min read to the end. He closed the file. He set it in the bottom drawer of his desk, locked it, and put the key somewhere Jordan would never look. He did not tell her. He would not show her. Because if she knew what he was thinking, she'd try to stop him. And he wasn't sure, if she asked him with those eyes, that he could hold that line. So he held it for her. The way he held all the things she shouldn't have to carry. Derek Cole's name went onto a list. The kind of list Jung-min didn't maintain in writing. Someday. Not now. Not while Jordan was still healing. She moved back to Chicago in increments. The way you approach something you've been afraid of, carefully, on your own terms, not because someone pushed you toward it. First a few weeks. Then longer. Then a drawer in his bedroom that she pretended wasn't symbolic. Then a closet. Then a keycard. Access to the private elevator that led to his penthouse floor, which she turned over in her hands for a full day before she accepted it. And when she did, he said nothing. Just watched her with that quiet, unreadable look he had. The one that contained more than his words ever did. She started consulting again. Her own clients, her own projects, her own name on the door of a small office in the West Loop that she'd chosen and furnished, and stocked with the kind of plants that needed regular attention. No more corporate ladders, no more navigating rooms full of people with smiling faces and hidden agendas. She was good at what she did. She'd always been good at what she did. Jung-min never interfered. Never offered resources she hadn't asked for. Never moved pieces around her without her knowledge. Never tried to shape her work or her world into something more convenient for his. When she asked for space, he gave it. When she needed him, he was already there. The equilibrium of it was, she hadn't expected that. Hadn't thought a man like him capable of it. He was, it turned out, capable of many things she hadn't expected. He brought her coffee the specific way she liked it without asking, every morning. He learned her friends' names and greeted them with a courtesy that was not performance. He sat through 3 episodes of a Korean drama she'd started watching, claiming indifference, and was fully invested by episode 4. He kept Smokey's photo, the one she'd taken of him on the porch that first week, in his wallet. He didn't know she knew about that. She knew. One evening in late October, Jordan stood on the penthouse balcony with the city spread below her like a fevered dream of light, her hands resting lightly against the railing, the air carrying the first bite of winter. She heard the door behind her. She felt him before his arms came around her waist, warm and firm and certain. The way he did everything. The way he was always going to do everything. He pressed his mouth to the curve of her neck and breathed her in. I told myself, he said against her skin, low and quiet, just for her, that I would ruin you. She turned slightly in his arms, enough to look at him. The black-brown eyes that had watched her from the moment she stepped forward on that porch, while everyone else stepped back. You didn't. No. His mouth curved, slow and private. You saved me. She smiled. She turned back to the city, leaning into the solid warmth of him, his arms tightening around her as the skyline burned against the dark. She'd come back to Chicago. She'd come back to herself. She'd found something in the mountains of Colorado that she hadn't been looking for, hadn't believed in, really, not after everything. And she'd been brave enough to walk into a North Loop high-rise and claim it. She was not the woman who had run. She was not the woman who had arrived at Havenwood pale and depleted and surviving. She was the woman who had looked at the most dangerous man in the room and offered him her hand, and who had understood, long before either of them was willing to say it, that he would never use it against her. Below them, Chicago hummed its loud, relentless hum. Behind them, in the locked bottom drawer of his desk, sat a file with a name in it. Jung-min hadn't touched it, but he hadn't forgotten it either. And if that man ever surfaced, if he ever appeared anywhere near the woman currently leaning against Jung-min's chest, her hands resting lightly against the railing, her smile quiet and real and entirely his, he would not hesitate. He had told her the truth about who he was, from the very beginning. He was dangerous to everyone. He was gentle with her. He was not capable of unconditional mercy. But he was absolutely, irrevocably, and with his whole guarded, complicated, fiercely protective heart, capable of love. He pressed his lips to her temple. She pressed her hand over his. The city went on burning below them, and neither of them was afraid. He was never meant to love someone like Jordan Sanders. But she became the only thing he chose not to destroy, and the only thing he would burn the world to protect.